Okay, good morning everybody. Let's get started this morning. I believe there are still a few people to come on board. I'm not sure what's happened with the login details this morning, but I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of that and we'll get that fixed. This session is being recorded and it will appear on our YouTube channel later on today, along with all the other webinars. I think this is number 11 that we've done over the period of COVID and the crisis that's affecting businesses and consumers. And if you want to go back and have a listen to any of the others, go back to YouTube and search for Harts Limited, with limited spelt in full, and you can have access to all the other webinars that we've done over the last few months. Bit of housekeeping. I'm going to try and get everybody to be muted so we don't have any background noise for the time being, but you will have the opportunity for questions and answers. And if at the end of the session, we'll go through the chat box and have a look at those. And also at the end, if you want to unmute yourself and shout out a question, please feel free to do so. If I don't know the answer to a question, please email me. I'll let you know I don't know the answer. Please email me. We'll look it up and come back to you. Bear in mind that legislation is changing. It seems to be daily at the moment. So let's see how that will actually affect matters going forward. And also, we're also after for suggestions for some future webinars. If there's anything you want us to cover, please feel free to give us a shout, drop me an email. My email address will be at the end of this webinar. And if you've got any suggestions, please feel free and we'll put something together for you. Okay. Quick disclaimer at the beginning, the following presentation is produced for general guidance only and professional advice should always be sought before any transaction is undertaken. And individual circumstances can vary and therefore no responsibility can be accepted by Harts Limited or any of their affiliates for any action taken or any decision made to refrain from action by attendees of this presentation. Okay. So today the contents, what we're going to cover is the VAT Reduce Rate. So that's from £20 to £5. We'll have a look at the stamp duty. We're going to have a look at the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. Not as straightforward as it sounds. The coronavirus job retention scheme bonus, and then we're going to touch on the Kickstart scheme and traineeships as well. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. Okay, so the VAT reduce rate from today up until 12th of January 2021. The VAT rate drops from 20% to 5% for suppliers of food and non-alcoholic beverages for consumption on the premises and hot takeaway food and non-alcoholic drinks. Also applies to hotel and holiday accommodation, applies to admission to certain attractions, and also applies to TOMS, which is the Tour Operators Margin Scheme. In relation to hotel and holiday accommodation, you can benefit from the temporary reduced rate if you supply sleeping accommodation in a hotel or a similar establishment, you make certain supplies of a holiday accommodation, you charge fees for caravan pitches and associated facilities, and charge fees for tent pitches and camping facilities. So it applies to all of those, and we're going to come on in a minute to what happens if you're taking deposits and so on. Also going to have a look at admission to certain attractions. So if you charge a fee for certain attractions where the suppliers are currently standard rated, you will only need to charge the reduced rate of VAT. If your fee you charge is currently exempt, then that will continue to be the case. So moving on to the VAT reduction. So what happens if you've got suppliers that straddle the dates? And this will often happen with hotel accommodation or camping, campsites and so on. One option is if you've taken a deposit and the customer has paid VAT at 20%, but the supply takes place during the reduction period, then you can reduce the VAT to 5% and potentially repay the difference to the customer. That's one option. Also, you can consider credit notes. And we've had some information through from a camping association, which basically says you could potentially issue a credit note for the invoice you've already raised and then issue a new invoice with the VAT at 5%. If you do that, then who's actually going to keep the money? So potentially, if you're going to charge VAT at 5% and your original price was £120, being the £100 plus the £20 VAT, are you still going to keep the £120 and just take the VAT out at 5%? It'd be interesting to know, the people who are on the webinar, if you could just type into the chat box, will you pass on the benefit or not? So if you think that suppliers should pass on the benefit, could you put pass on? Or if you think that the consumer should just continue to pay the same amount, just put in same amount. Be interesting to know what you feel, bearing in mind a lot of these people have struggled, a lot of businesses have struggled, and is it to encourage them to keep them, make extra money as a result of the VAT change, or should the cut be passed on to the consumer? So if we could take a straw poll, and if you could fill in the chat box for that, that would be great, and we can go through some of the answers afterwards. You also need to consider, if you are a bar or restaurant or coffee shop, consider the possibility of mixed supplies. Well, this will actually happen. So, for instance, if you've got a sale of beer, coffee, sandwich, crisps and fish and chips all as one meal, for eating, 4 out of the 5 are subject to the reduced rate at 5%. Beer is going to be actually at 20% because it's an alcoholic drink. Non-alcoholic beer, you'd be all right, that you can have at 5%. However, for takeaway purposes, the beer and crisps are standard rated. Bear in mind the crisps were always standard rated before, and it's cold takeaway food, so that remains at standard rated. The coffee and the fish and chips are at 5%, and the sandwich is always 0 rated because it's cold takeaway food. So you have a big problem there. As from this morning, you'll need to retrain your staff. You're going to have to change your tills, make sure that everyone knows what they're tilling in to make sure you get the correct result for VAT. I can see VAT Visit people having a field day with this later on, but it's something that you do need to consider. Moving on, stamp duty. So the stamp duty reduction applies from last week, from the 8th of July 2020 through to the 31st of March 2021. So under 500,000, this applies to residential property. So under 500,000, you will pay no stamp duty. The next 425,000 is at 5%, the next 575,000 at 10%, and the balance is at 12%. So that basically applies to all properties which you're buying over 1.5 million. However, bear in mind, it doesn't mean there is no stamp duty to pay. If you've already got a property, and this is a second property or a buy-to-let property for residential purposes, you also always have the 3% additional stamp duty. So you need to add on 3% to the above rates. Now, if you're also having your property portfolio within a limited company, and it's residential properties, then the 3% applies to that as well. So it's a little bit misleading to say there's no stamp duty. Effectively, if it's second properties, yes, there is always the 3%. So if you're looking to build your property portfolio over the next 6 months, 9 months or so, during the reduction period, bear in mind you've still got the 3% stamp duty to pay. And then from 1st of April next year, the rates revert back to the rates before the reduction. Moving on to our Eat Out to Help Out scheme. I'd like to take another quick straw poll here as well. Is this going to encourage you to eat out? Bearing in mind that restaurants and so on have only just opened, would you go out on a Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday from the 3rd of August to the 31st of August 2021? Bearing in mind you can go as often as you like. So it'd be interesting to take a straw poll. Is this going to encourage you to eat out? Maybe listen to what you've got to do first. If you're a consumer, not much for you to do, but if you're the owner and you're supplying the meals, then there is a fair bit for you to do. So basically you have to register for the scheme, and the registration, I believe, is now open as from yesterday. You can offer a 50% discount up to a maximum of £10 per person to diners for eating food and non-alcoholic drinks. You then claim the money back from the government. There is no limit to the number of times a customer can claim. So if a customer comes in for lunch and dinner every day, every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, from the 3rd of August to the end of August, they can get that £10 per person discount. And alcohol and service charges are excluded. Who can register? If you sell food for immediate consumption on the premises, you can register for this scheme. And you registered with a food business, as a food business, to the local authority on and before the 7th of July, which is just before the announcement was made. You can't register if you only offer takeaway food and drink, or you're a mobile food van or a trailer, or you offer just catering services for private functions. So this scheme does not apply in those cases. How to register? The email address is there. If you want to take a note of that email address, I'll just keep the screen on for a couple of seconds longer, but it is available on HMRC's website. And as I say, I think registration for the scheme is now open. So I will going to then, I've not put all the T's and C's on here, because basically what you need to register if you are a restaurant or you're offering food as an eat-in. So you will need a government gateway ID and password for your business. You need the name and address of each establishment to be registered, unless you're registered more than 25. You need your UK bank account number and sort code, the address on your bank account for the business. You'll also need your VAT registration number, employer pay-as-you-earn scheme reference number, corporation tax or self-assessment unique tax number. So once you've got through all of that lot, then you can start to register. So they don't seem to have made it all that easy. If you haven't got a government gateway ID, you then have to register for one, and you'll get a password for your business. Then once you've registered, you'll be registered instantly, and you'll receive a registration reference number. And you'll need this when you claim back any reimbursement. There are promotional materials available on HMRC's website to encourage people to come into your restaurant, which you can put up to say you're part of this scheme. And the list of available registrations and available places you can eat will be available on a public register. Businesses that have more than one establishment, so if you've got more than one restaurant, for example, you have to register all the establishments under the scheme. You can add other ones to it, but you might end up being some sort of delay. When you start offering the discount, you've got to wait until you're registered before you can actually offer the discounts. You cannot offer discounts before the 3rd of August. And the scheme is expected you will offer it during the whole of the opening hours on all the eligible days that you're open and on all qualifying sales of food and drink. So you can't mix and match and say that this is the menu for this, for the scheme, and this is a menu which is outside the scheme. It applies to everything. The records that you've got to keep the total number of people who've used the scheme in your establishment, the total value of transactions under the scheme, the total amount of discounts that you've actually given, and you've got to keep that for each establishment that's actually in the scheme. So if you've got 2 or 3 restaurants, the restaurant manager will actually have to make sure you've got records of all of that. The service to use the claim for reimbursements will be available on the 7th of August, and the service closes on the 30th of September, so you've got until then to make your final claim. You've got to wait 7 days from registration to make the first claim, and they will then make a payment out within 5 working days. And you can submit claims then on a weekly basis. You still need to pay the VAT based on the full amount of the customer's bills, so that's pre-discount, and the money you receive is treated as taxable income. And that's basically it. So you can see there's a lot of terms and conditions, there's a lot of information that you need to keep. It's not that straightforward, so if you're involved in that and you want some help, please let us know and we can help you out through that. Okay, next one, which is a bit more simple, so it seems, is a coronavirus job retention scheme bonus. So employers who retain staff for 3 months after the furlough scheme ends will receive a £1,000 government bonus for each employee. So it's a one-off of £1,000, It applies to all UK employers. It applies for every furloughed employee who remains continuously employed through to 31st of January 2021. And they have to have earned above the lower earnings threshold of £520 a month between the end of October and the end of January. And the bonus payments are then made in February 2021. Now, we're waiting for guidance on this because it seems to be very much a blunt instrument here. Because there's a lot of companies who've already brought back all their employees off furlough prior to this announcement being made. Are they going to be entitled to this £1,000 bonus? At the moment, yes, it would seem so. And we've also seen in the press recently that a lot of the bigger companies are saying, well, we don't need this. We've already brought our staff back, and they're not actually going to they've said they're not actually going to be claiming it. But it'll be interesting to see when the further guidance comes out by the end of the month as to whether there are any restrictions on this or not. So again, it's watch this space, and as soon as we have any guidance, we'll be able to update you all. That was pretty much it on the job retention scheme. And now I would like to touch on the Kickstart scheme. The government wants to create 6 million work placements aimed at 16 to 24-year-olds on universal credit. The funding is 100% of the national minimum wage for 25 hours per week, plus the employer's NIC and auto-enrolment costs. So basically, if you've got somebody who is on universal credit and they're between 16 and 24, and you want only 25 hours a week, then all the costs will be met by the government. The idea of this is that they're trying not to get young people who are going to become long-term unemployed. So if they can have work placements, they're going to gain work experience and hopefully easier to get jobs in the future. And if you hire new apprenticeships, the government will pay £2,000 to employers in England for each apprentice hired under age 25. And from over 25s, they'll pay £1,500. Now, this applies from August the 1st up till the 31st of January. Now, at the moment, it is basically comes out from their document, which is a plan for jobs, which is a policy document, basically, and hasn't actually come up with all the guidance as yet and what the ins and outs of the scheme are. So again, it's going to be watch this space. And if you're in that position, you're looking to take people on in August, please feel free to give us a call, drop me an email with any questions you may have. And as soon as the guidance comes out, we can actually come back to you. So I think we're up to the point where we're up to questions and answers. So what I'd like to do first of all is go through the chat box and see what sort of questions that we've got in here. Right, so we're going back to what people have come back to us and to say, well, will we keep on to the money or not? I think people are generally saying the same amount. We've got 1, 2, 3. People have said, yeah, they should keep the same amount, and one person has actually said, no, they should actually pass it on. It'd be interesting if more people could reply, and so we can get a bit more of a straw poll on that. That would be great. And in relation to eating out, people are saying it doesn't really incentivize people to eat out, and that's across the board. It might make days out cheaper, but other than that, people are not too concerned about it. They're saying it's not really going to encourage people to eat out or not in relation to Eat Out to Help Out scheme. So has the government done the right thing here? That'll be interesting to know. If anybody else is on this call and just wants to just slot in the chat box before we close to say whether they think it would encourage, we've only had 3 or 4 replies. If you use the chat box, it's speech bubble in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and just type in your answers to there to say whether that would encourage you to eat out, to help out, because this is a flagship policy of the government. That will be great. Let's see if we get any more replies coming in. Give it a couple of more seconds. As I say, if you've got any further suggestions of other stuff that you want us to put on, please feel free to let me know, and I'll be able to sort something out for you. Another thing that's come out of the VAT reduction as well is, are we going to see schemes where restaurants are going to say, well, you can have this meal and you'll get a free bottle of wine? In that case, they can get more of their discount. Are we going to see some sort of schemes put on by restaurants operating that? It'll be interesting to see what actually happens going forward. Okay, we've had nothing else more in the chat box. If anybody else has got any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and shout out. Don't have a problem with that at all. Or if you want to email me, my email is on the screen. Please feel free to drop me an email, and I'll get back to you. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we'll see you on future webinars. Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
I can tell you who's getting the votes tomorrow night.
£10. That's all I'm paying.